guys, it's Armin. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hello. I hope you stick around. Don't forget to hit subscribe down below as well as the notification bell so you can be told to make a new video. Today I'm yet again doing another recent reads where I talk about books I read like 3 months ago and I just never made wrap-ups for because apparently that takes too much consistency for me and I just can't film monthly wrap-ups, apparently is the moral of the story. So I have a bunch of books. I'm gonna give very brief synopses because I don't want to be here for an hour again. So yeah, let's just get right into it. The very first book I read during this wrap-up period was Erotic Stories for Punjabi Widows. Now, look at this beautiful cover. This book sounds a bit misleading, but not completely misleading. So the title of the story is a little bit relevant, but there's also like so much in this book that is completely not given by this cover. There's like a whole murder mystery plot, there's like a lot of cultural stuff, there's like some laugh out loud moments, there's some actual crying moments. This book literally has it all, and if you read this book, which I highly recommend you read this book, it's probably one of my favorite books I've read all year. I highly recommend that you read the audiobook because, or like listen to the audiobook because it was amazing, and I think if I had read the actual book I wouldn't have had the same experience. The narrator on the audiobook was amazing. She did all of the perfect voices and it was just like a really good book. Don't let the title put you off of reading it, or if you want to read it because of the title, then go for it and expect to be pleasantly surprised because there's a lot more to this book than you think. I'm gonna not give a synopsis for this one because I can't stick to what I say, but more so I don't want to ruin anything in this book. So here's the book. Read it. So the next book I read was The Buddha in the Attic, which I read for my Asian American Studies class, and this book was actually really good. I gave it 5 stars. This is kind of a book told in a unique narration style. It's told from like the what's it called? The Collective We, which is not something I typically read, which I've read 2 of them for this class, and one of them I hated and one of them I loved. So if you're gonna read one of them, read this one. This is told in sections and it follows the stories of the Japanese picture brides who were brought to the United States as brides based on only a photograph of their potential groom. When they got here, they realized that this groom you know, was often many years older than what the picture described and also not nearly as rich, usually pretty poor, usually migrant workers, and now they're stuck in America with, you know, this husband that they've agreed to marry. It's historical fiction, but the picture brides were real people and the experiences described were like real experiences, but it's like a fictional account of like made up people essentially. But the picture brides were real, like the history is real. So I actually really enjoyed the Collective We narration style. It was actually very poignant. It kind of made things more effective in my opinion for this particular story. So I highly recommend reading this book if you want a good historical fiction. I really liked it. Next up was the Henna Wars. This one was really popular on BookTube like when it came out last year, and I just never got around to reading it until this year, and I actually really liked it. It was really cute. The Henna Wars follows a lesbian Bengali girl in high school. She lives in Scotland, I believe, and she is just, you know, coming out to her family, dealing with the repercussions of that as a Bengali person, and her family is, you know, initially not super happy about that because there's like a lot of homophobia in a lot of, you know, communities of color, and so she has to deal with all of that while also just being in high school, dealing with a lot of racism in high school and a lot of like cultural appropriation and stuff. And essentially the premise of this book is that she is starting her own henna business to do this project for school where she has to like do her own business, and so she decides to do henna, and another girl in her class who is not Indian decides to also do henna, and so she's like, why is she doing that? That's my culture, like you are culturally appropriating this, and the other girl like doesn't understand. But the other girl is also somebody that the main character has a crush on, and they're kind of like developing feelings for each other while also dealing with this mess of like culture stuff. So it's actually a really good book. It's not all light and fluffy though. There's some parts that really made me mad because I saw like my own cultural experiences reflected in certain moments, and I'm like, ugh, I get this. And so it wasn't the most pleasant to read at times, but overall it was a really good read. The next book I read was I Would Leave Me If I Could by Halsey. I listened to the audiobook for this. It's like her poetry collection. I saw it in the store and I was like, ah, that looks cool, I'll listen to it. And then the audiobook was like really short, so I was like, let me just do it. But I would say if you're gonna listen to it or read it, don't read it all in one go, because a lot of the poems were kind of repetitive. I didn't love it as much as I thought I would. Some of them were like good. For the most part, I was like, what is happening in these poems? Because it's a little bit difficult for me to sometimes understand poetry. I tend to take things a little bit literally, and a lot of this was very metaphorical, but the metaphors didn't exactly make sense to me. So it was like very graphic imagery of things that I didn't understand how they related, and I'm like, how literal am I supposed to take this? Because I don't understand a thing. So a lot of poems were like that. A lot of them were like just different versions of the same poem, and they dealt with the exact same thing. So I think if you like took all of that out, you would have like very few actually really good poems that I enjoyed. So take that as you will. I didn't love it, but if you're into that kind of poetry, then maybe check it out. It's also read by the author herself, so that was a cool little thing. You get to hear it how she wrote it. The next book I read was The Descent of the Drowned, which was sent to me by the publisher, and I wish I could have talked about this book earlier. I don't know if I've mentioned it in any of my videos, but I didn't make a recent read, so I couldn't really talk about it in depth. But this was a book that came out recently, and it was so good. If you liked An Ember in the Ashes, I think you would really enjoy this one, because not just because they're both like similar cultures, but they're both kind of written with the same detail and attention to the cultures that you would want if you're reading a book that is like Indo-Persian inspired. And this one, I think, more so than An Ember in the Ashes. So The Ember in the Ashes like jumps straight into it, and the culture is woven in really well throughout the entire story. This one is a little bit more info dumpy, and for like the first part of the story, it was a lot of information dump, and that's like the one thing I didn't like about the story, because once it gets started, and it's so good and so fast paced, and I absolutely loved it. It's just the very first part is like, you kind of have to get through the first part and like pay attention to the first part so you know what's going on later, but it is really good once you get started to it, but it's like a little bit hard to get into. Essentially, there's a system of slavery tied to religion in this book, and the main character is like a slave, like a goddess slave essentially, so she's like a prostitute, but it's like glorified prostitution because it's like under the guise of being like patrons to like the goddess and whatever, and it's like this whole system that's like really kind of messed up, and she's like a part of the system, and she's been brought into this and like raised in this system, and she like hates it, and a lot of people have just been brainwashed into accepting it and like, you know, thinking everything's fine. And then the other character in this is kind of the son of the ruler, like the dictator of this world, and he is he's like the bastard son, so his mom is dead, and his mom was like not part of the royals or whatever, and it's like this kind of complicated thing going on, but essentially there's like some other like really cool, you know, side stuff, like really deep, like, you know, lore stuff going on, and it's a really rich world, and it's a really cool story, and there's some like really good quotes in here actually, which I don't have the bookmark in here, but there was a really cool bookmark that came with this copy, and it has a really cool quote on it, so I would highly recommend checking this out if you need like a good fantasy. This one was good. The next book I read I also really loved. It was The Luck of the Titanic by Stacy Lee. This one was sent to me by Penguin Teen, and I absolutely loved it. This was the very first book that I've ever read by Stacy Lee, but it was not the last, let me tell you. I love her writing style. It's so good. This one's a historical fiction, and I think her other book is also historical fiction, so I think that's like what she writes. But this one is set on the Titanic, and I think it's just so cool because this tells, it's obviously fiction, like this is fiction, the characters in this are fake, but the premise it's based on, well, I'm literally just explaining historical fiction to you, but the premise that it's based on is kind of telling the stories of the Chinese people who were on the Titanic, because there were, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there were like 8 Chinese people on the Titanic whose stories were not told, because whenever they, like, the ones that did survive, I think there were like 6 that did survive, but whenever they tried to speak up and like tell their stories, they were like shot down, and they were like criticized really heavily, and so a lot of them just didn't talk about their experiences, which really sucks because that was such a traumatic experience to live through, like the sinking of a ship, you know, and you've survived and you've come out, and now everybody's telling their stories, and whenever you try to express yours, you're just like shut down. And so it really sucks that that happened, and I think their stories are like coming out now, which you know, it feels like too little too late, but I mean, it's better than nothing. So I think there's also a movie or a documentary or something that was made about them. If I find it, I will link it down below, because it's really important to tell their stories as well. Because it wasn't just like rich white people on the Titanic, you know, that's the narrative we get. It was like rich white people on this boat, but there were also a lot of laborers and a lot of like, you know, lower class passengers, and those are really most of the people who died were like from the lower classes. So a lot of their stories are not told, and especially like marginalized people on this boat, more so than already being lower class, they were also facing racism and all of kinds of stuff, you know? And so this book really delves into that. It does not shy away from those experiences, so while the characters themselves are made up, you still get really attached to these characters, and you really feel for the experiences that they go through and the struggles that they go through. So the premise of this book essentially is that Valora Luck, the main character, is an acrobat, and she's a twin brother who was also an acrobat when they were younger. They did that to, like, you know, survive on the streets. And her father has just died, and like the woman that she was working for has also died, and so now she needs new employment, and she finds out that one of the passengers on the Titanic is going to be this like big circus guy, and like the owner of one of the biggest circuses in America or something like that. And so she wants to essentially meet up with her brother and get him to agree to help her get both of them jobs in this circus and passage to America so that they can work in the circus in America. And her brother is like really disillusioned and everything, and he is like working in the coal mines, and he is on this ship as a laborer, like going to, I think he's going to Cuba to get a job there with like his little crew. And she ends up on the Titanic, like she sneaks onto the Titanic because they don't let her in because she's Chinese, even though she had a ticket. And she sneaks on, and she's like doing this whole thing, you know, trying to get them to America. And it's such a good story. Like, I highly recommend this book. It was 5 stars. It was told so well. And I'm just now remembering some stuff that happens in this book that like made me cry. So it's a very good book. Highly recommend it. And it was so good that I immediately went and picked up The Downstairs Girl by Stacy Lee, because I wasn't ready to leave her writing behind because it was so good. This is another historical fiction. I think I also gave this one 5 stars. So essentially the premise of this book, it's set in 1890 in Atlanta, and the main character Jo works as a lady's maid to like this really wealthy family in Atlanta, and she is Chinese and she's living in Atlanta in the 1800s, so, you know, racism. So she's working as a lady's maid by day, and by night she's actually a secret columnist for this newspaper, and she actually like secretly lives underneath the newspaper because, like, you know, there was like during Prohibition they had created this secret, you know, thing underneath, and nobody knows about it, but she's like found it with her dad, and so she's like living there. And so she has like this connection to the newspaper, and it's like going downhill, and she wants to help save the newspaper. So by night she's like volunteering her services secretly. Nobody knows that it's her, and she becomes Miss Sweetie. And Miss Sweetie essentially loves to go against gender norms, because all of these like wealthy high-class women are sending her things about like, oh, you know, I want to ask my beau to the horse race, but I know that's like not done, you know, even though they told us we could. I'm like, I don't know what to do. And she'll be like, don't, you know, why are you doing that? Just go ahead and ask, you know, like it's time that you did your thing or whatever. But she does it like in really punny ways, and she'll like write puns and like horse race type puns and stuff like that, and just she's really good at what she does, and it's a huge success, and it gets really controversial because, you know, there's this secret woman who's like talking about going against gender norms and everything, and she's like challenging all of these fixed ideas. And it's such a good book. I really enjoyed reading it. There are some like actual laugh out loud moments. There's also some moments where it's like, racism. So just like keep that in mind, but it's so good. I highly recommend it. The next book I read was Bitter in the Mouth. I read this from my Asian American Studies class, and I kind of somehow forgot that this was like supposed to be an Asian book. There's like a kind of a plot twist, but I'm not going to get into that. This book follows a main character who has synesthesia. She can like taste words, which is like kind of disruptive to her life. It's kind of a story about culture and identity, and I don't really know how else to describe it, but it was good. I didn't love it, but I did enjoy some parts of it. I would say the audiobook for this, I did try it because there was something that was annoying me about the way the book is written, and I thought that maybe being an audiobook would be easier, and it was much worse. So essentially, because this character has synesthesia, every time there's dialogue in the book, every word is followed by the taste. And I assume like whenever it is like a synesthesia thing. You know, you hear the word and then you taste the taste, but when it's written, it's like each word is followed by another word, and it was really hard to read the dialogue. And then when you listen to the audiobook, they had to read every single word. So it was like, hi, peanut butter. What? Green tea. You know, like, it was like one by one, every single word, so it was a little bit annoying. But the book was good. It was alright. Next up, I read The Poet X, which I listened to the audiobook, which is read by the author herself. Really good. I think out of all 3 books by Elizabeth Acevedo that I've read now, I think this one might have been my favorite, or Clap When You Land, one of the 2. With The Fire on High, I didn't love it. Maybe the audiobook would have been better, but this one was really good. Highly recommend. It deserves the hype. It was pretty good. Next up, I read Internment. I read this for class, and it was on my TBR for a long time, so I was excited that I finally got to read it, and I was a bit disappointed. Internment is a dystopian YA set in a near future where Muslims are put into internment camps, and the main character is this teenage girl who is also interned, and she's like trying to start a rebellion essentially to get out of this internment camp. And you know, the premise of the story was difficult for me. I think I said this in one of my other videos, because as a Muslim in America, like, I saw, you know, what was happening under Trump, and it honestly, whenever you are a marginalized group, that kind of stuff seems possible. It seems like it'll happen, and it's happened in the past for like other groups, and so it's not that much of a far shot to imagine something like this happening. So the start of the book was actually pretty difficult to read, because it kind of goes through like the small steps it takes to just get to such a drastic thing, and it seems realistic. And then you get to the actual book and the writing of the book, and I was like, this is not working out, because there was like a weird love triangle, there was like a, you know, some really weird quotes, and like, teens don't talk like this, she's being really profound, and just the kind of, it was like there were a lot of cliches and like really tropey things in there, and there was one romance thing hinted at that was just weird, and I'm like, I don't love this. I don't think I gave it a very good rating. I don't know exactly what I gave it, but it wasn't great. So I think if you wanted like an introduction to something like this where it's like heavy YA, I would not recommend this book. I think the premise was good, and then it wasn't executed well, and I don't want this to be what people see when they read something like this, which kind of sucks to say, because like, I love supporting authors of color, but I didn't love this book, and I don't think it's good representation. So yeah, there's that. Next up, I read The Night Diary, which I think I mentioned before, but this one follows a 12-year-old girl during the partition of India and Pakistan, and she lives in Pakistan, and her family is Hindu, but her mom, who is dead, was Muslim. And so she has this kind of dual identity as a Hindu and a Muslim, and because her mom is dead, they all follow, like, you know, the dad, and whenever they have to leave their home in Pakistan, or what is now Pakistan, to go to, like, what is now India. And it's told through, like, the lens of a child, and she's writing letters to her dead mother, and that's how the story is told. And I listened to the audiobook for this, and it was so, like, so emotional and really raw, and it's a middle grade, but it's not, like, a very middle grade, if you know what I'm talking about. Like, you could read this as an adult and still feel things, and still not be bored, and not feel like you're reading a children's book. Like, this is, I think it's good for all ages, because obviously it's written from the perspective of a child, but it's like, the things that she talks about in this book are struggles that anyone can go through, and I think that her perspective is very valuable, because you often don't think about the deep thoughts that a child can have and how these things can impact them. And whenever you see the stuff she goes through and the way she processes these things, and, you know, the things that she focuses on, it's all really, I think it's a very important read, and I would recommend everybody read this book, because it's not even that long. It's not, like, gonna take up too much of your life to read, and even if it did, I think it's really a good book to read. Next up, I read Interpreter of Maladies by Lahiri. This one was recommended to me by my professor, and I'm so glad she did, because I loved it. It's like 9 short stories, and they were all really good. Some of them were like better than others, but overall, I think I give this book at least 4, if not 5 stars. I really enjoyed it, and yeah, but I think in the future I will definitely check out more books by this author, because I did really enjoy this one, and she did like win a Pulitzer Prize for it, so I would check it out if I were you. The next book I read, I don't actually have a copy of. I listened to it on audiobook. It's called The Stationery Shop, and it's been on my TBR since I saw it, and I'm gonna buy the book because the cover is gorgeous, and I gave it 5 stars because I loved it. This story is told in 2 different time periods, from a couple different perspectives. It's set in Iran in like 1943, I believe, and then in the United States in 2013. So there's like 2 stories going on, but it's like one let me just tell you the premise. So there's this girl who lives in Iran, and she falls in love with this boy in a stationery/bookshop, which is really cute, like a meet cute, you know, what dreams are made of. Anyways, she's supposed to marry this guy, and on the day that she's supposed to meet him for them to get married, there is a coup in Iran, and this is like historical fiction, so this coup actually happened, and the guy never shows up. And then she, you know, has to move on from this, and eventually she moves to America, she goes to college, she marries this other guy, and then she's like 70 years old or something, and she finds out that this guy is in a nursing home close to where she lives. And so in the future, in 2013, she has set up a meeting to see him and ask what happened and why he never showed up, and essentially just see him for the first time. And it was such a gripping book and such an emotional book, and it was very good, and I highly recommend it. It also does a lot of like historical stuff. There's a lot of stuff about foreign involvement and kind of broken dreams and things that are... Somebody walked in and I lost my train of thought, so I'm just gonna keep going. But I highly recommend reading that book. If you're into historical fiction at all, I loved it, so definitely read it. The next book I read was... It's a children's book. I listened to it on audiobook, and I saw it on like... Libby has like this Pride Month thing where they have like a bunch of LGBT books, and this was on it, and I was like, wow, a children's book, and it was read by Neil Patrick Harris, so I checked it out. It's called And Tango Makes Three. It's a picture book, and this didn't have pictures, so like I kind of missed out on half the experience. But essentially it follows this family of penguins, and the two penguins are gay, and then they adopt like a child with the help of the zookeeper. It's like 8 minutes long, and it was really cute, and honestly I was just like, I haven't read a book in 3 weeks, and this sounds cute, so I listened to it. It was actually really cute. And apparently, I found out that it's based on a true story, so if you go to like the zoo, I can't remember which zoo it is, but if you go to the zoo where the story is set, then you can see these penguins, and there's like a little gay penguin family. I can't even speak, oh my god, but it's so cute. Like, who would have thought? Anyways, I think it's really cool that there's like a children's book about this, because representation starts early, guys. It's important. So yeah, I read that. And then, after a big reading hiatus, after school ended, took me a while, I finally read An Emotion of Great Delight by Tahara Mafi, and the rest of this video is just gonna be me talking about this book because I have a lot of thoughts. So this is a new release, came out like last week as of the time when I'm filming this, and it's set in 2003, and it follows a Muslim American girl who is going through it. This book is like a slice of the worst period of her life. Her brother has died. This is what you get at the beginning. Her brother has died. Her mom is falling apart, and her dad is in the hospital. Her dad is dying, essentially, and she's like estranged with her sister. They're not getting along, and she's also heartbroken, so there's all of that. And I think the main portion of the story takes place over a few days, and it's kind of fine because it's not sustainable. Like, the way she's living is not sustainable. She is essentially going through the worst period of her life, and there's a lot of trigger warnings. There's like self-harm, suicidal tendencies, like there's a lot of stuff. Check out the trigger warnings before you read this book, because this book does not have trigger warnings in it. It also does not have an acknowledgement or a like a dedication at the beginning. It is just the book. It's about 200 pages long, and that is one of my biggest qualms with this book. I thought that this book was going to be 5 stars up until the point where I read the last page, because it ended and it wasn't over in my head. Like, this book is very much what they call slice of life. It's like, you know, period A to period B, and so much is introduced in this book. It's like there's like 100 different things going on, and she's dealing with all of them, and then none of them actually get any closure, and she's like still dealing with all of them. And I'm just like, when I read a book like this, when it's this heavy, I'm expecting it to have some sort of closure. Like, I want her to deal with her issues with her dad. I want her to deal with, you know, her dead brother. I want her to deal with her sister. I want her to deal with her, like, boyfriend or whatever. And you get, like, you get, like, half of a thing, and even if that. And I'm just like, okay, so you gave me all of this. This book could have been, like, double the size, and it would have... Double. Yeah, that's double. It could have been, like, twice the size of this, and it would have easily, like, dealt with everything. And I love her writing. The writing was amazing, and it just wasn't executed very well, in my opinion. I don't know if that was intentional to like cut it like that, but I didn't enjoy the fact that it wasn't dealt with. And also, I do have some issues with some of the characters. So like, her best friend in this book, one of the issues is that like they're no longer friends, and you kind of have this you gotta have this dual time period thing where it's like flashing back and forth, so you find out what happened in the past and what's happening in the present. and you find out that in the past, like, her best friend like dumped her basically, and best friend breakups suck. So like I wanted something, you know, something of context, but essentially the best friend is just really vain and really kind of stuck up and like doesn't have a personality, and her big issue with her friend is that her friend is prettier than her. Her friend is like, you know, getting people who like her, and one of those people happens to be this girl's brother, and her brother has fallen in love with her best friend, and she is so paranoid that her brother likes her best friend and that they're hooking up secretly. Hi, kitty. Hi. Let me go let my cat out. To the point where she basically dumps her best friend because she thinks that she's hooking up, and she's like not trusting her friend whenever she says that they're not hooking up. And it's just really frustrating because even like a year in the future, after the fact that all of this has already happened, and she will just randomly come up and like harass her, and she's like, you're hooking up with my brother, and she's like, I haven't talked to your brother in like a year, what are you talking about? And she's just like really rude for no reason, and like I don't even know what's up. Anyways, and the whole point is like, it's like they're like two of the only Muslim girls in this entire town, and it's like 2003, and you know they're dealing with racism and all this kind of stuff, and they're like understand each other, and then she just suddenly doesn't, and it's like really weird, and it's not even dealt with. Like there's like no closure for that whole thing, and it was just really frustrating to me because I wanted something else. And like all of her other issues, it's like the point where she's at the end of the book is not like nothing has changed. Like, you know, there's like no character development in here, and I don't know if that was intentional. Again, I don't want to criticize this book if that was an intentional choice, because it was like, you know, not everything has to be resolved, I get that, but also I feel like this was half of a book, and the half that I got was really good, and then I just want the other half of the book. Like, it ended, and I was like, what? Where's the rest of the book? And yeah, that was a big word explosion, but I don't know. I don't know what to rate this book. I don't know how I feel about it. Like, I was so excited for it, and I bought it, and I was really loving it, and then I just wasn't. I did cry several times, because again, her writing is amazing, and it's very poignant, and if that's the kind of book you like, and you don't really care about closure like me, then definitely read this book. I highly recommend it if that's what you want, because it was so good up until that point, and I wish there had been more. I wish it had been longer. I wish more stuff had been dealt with, but alas, this little 200-page book is what you get. You'll read it in a little bit, depending on how fast you read. I read this in like 3 hours, maybe? 2.5, 3? I don't know. But, it's pretty. I guess I have it now, so there's that. Anyways, those are all of the books that I have read in the recent past, maybe not so recent past. If you enjoyed this video and you stayed to the end of it, leave a crying emoji at the end of this video. Let me know down below if you've read any of these books along with your crying emoji, and give this video a like, and don't forget to hit subscribe so you can be told when I make a new video, because hopefully I will be posting new content very soon. Thank you guys for watching. Bye bye.